Once upon a time, in the lively village of Kidundu, there was a man named Mwendwa, who had a talent that left everyone puzzled and at times in stitches. You see, Mwendwa had an incredible ability. He could eat and eat and eat some more, without ever getting full. It was as if his stomach was a bottomless pit, and this peculiar gift earned him the nickname Mwendwa wa Mukima, meaning Mwendwa of the endless appetite. Mwendwa wasn't picky when it came to food. Anything that could be chewed was welcome on his plate. But his absolute favorite was rice with chicken and goat meat, especially when seasoned just right. He would show up at every event in the village: weddings, funerals, harvest celebrations, you name it. If there was food, Mwendwa would be the first in line, waiting with a grin that could light up the whole village. At one memorable event, a grand wedding feast, Mwendwa ate so much that even the village dogs stood aside, amazed at his capacity. There was a notorious dog named Mutina, owned by Mukima, a man who loved to joke that both his dog and Mwendwa had the same spirit of hunger. Mutina, famous for gobbling up food as if tomorrow wouldn't come, seemed to be the only creature capable of keeping up with Mwendwa. But even Mutina had limits, while Mwendwa had none. Now one day, Mwendwa attended a funeral for a distant relative, a child in fact, whom he barely knew. As usual, his mind wasn't on mourning, it was on the food. His eyes were fixed on the pots of steaming rice and plates of succulent chicken. His own mother, who was the head cook for the event, knew exactly what would happen next. She barely had a chance to set the plates down before Mwendwa rushed forward, almost knocking her into the fire as he scrambled to get the largest portion. "Mwendwa, are you trying to send me to the ancestors before my time?" his mother cried, waving a spoon at him. But Mwendwa, oblivious to her scolding, was already devouring his mountain of food, leaving no grain of rice behind. The villagers watched in awe, some shaking their heads, others laughing. It wasn't long before Mwendwa finished his plate and, as usual, hovered near the leftovers, side by side with Mutina, the village dog. The two of them scavenged through what remained, their heads bobbing up and down like synchronized dancers. Then came the most bizarre moment. At another funeral, Mwendwa took center stage. It was the burial of a young boy, and everyone was mourning silently when suddenly, Mwendwa stood up and began to speak as if he had known the boy intimately. "For as long as I knew this young man," he started solemnly, "he was always a good soul. We shared many meals together." People gasped and exchanged confused glances. The boy had been just 5 years old. What meals could they possibly have shared? But Mwendwa, undeterred, continued, "I will miss those moments, but I will not miss the food today," he added with a grin, as if the whole point of the funeral was the feast that would follow. The crowd erupted in laughter, unable to contain themselves. Even the village elder, who was known for his stern face, chuckled so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. As the years went by, Mwendwa's reputation only grew. He didn't seem to gain any weight, no matter how much he ate. It was like he and Mutina were running a secret competition, who could eat the most without bursting. Mukima loved to joke, "These two, my dog Mutina and Mwendwa, they must be possessed by the same spirit. They eat more than the entire village combined, yet not an ounce of fat on them." Mwendwa's legend reached its peak one day when, after consuming what seemed to be the whole village's feast at a community gathering, he stretched out on the grass, rubbed his belly, and with a deep sigh said, "Now, that's just the appetizer. Where's the main course?" The village erupted in such wild laughter that people fell to the ground, their jaws wide open, showing every last tooth in their heads. Even Mutina barked excitedly, wagging her tail as if she understood the joke. One day, Mwendwa's mother grew tired of his antics. "Mwendwa," she said, shaking her head, "one of these days you'll even forget to attend your own wedding because of food." She had no idea just how prophetic her words would be. Pause, please. Are you enjoying listening to the story? Please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, and also commenting if you are still interested in listening to our story. Tell us the next story you would love to hear from us. Let's continue telling our story. Now, Mwendwa was a man with little interest in anything that wasn't edible. So when the day came for him to marry the beautiful Wanjiru, the entire village wondered whether he would actually make it through the ceremony without sneaking off for a snack. The preparations for the wedding were grand. Goats were slaughtered, chickens roasted, and mountains of rice were piled high. This was not just a union between two people, but a feast to be remembered by the whole village. As the procession began, Wanjiru looked stunning in her traditional attire, adorned with beads and colorful cloths. The crowd gathered, singing and dancing as they waited for Mwendwa to emerge and take his place beside his bride. But as time passed, there was no sign of Mwendwa. The drumbeats grew louder, the singing more vibrant, but Mwendwa was nowhere to be seen. Where had he gone? Whispers started circulating through the crowd. Mwendwa's disappeared. Maybe he got cold feet? Mwendwa? Cold feet? Never. More like an empty stomach. A few villagers, knowing Mwendwa too well, decided to check behind the cooking area, where giant pots of food were simmering. And sure enough, there he was, Mwendwa, not standing but sitting, his legs outstretched, with a giant cooking pot between his feet, devouring a mountain of rice mixed with juicy chunks of goat meat. His hands moved so fast between the pot and his mouth that the food seemed to disappear into thin air. His face was smeared with grease, and he barely noticed the crowd gathering around him. Mwendwa, his best man, Kamo shouted, half amused, half frustrated. The ceremony. Your bride is waiting for you. Mwendwa looked up, eyes wide, as if he had just remembered what day it was. Ah, Kamo, I'll be right there, he mumbled through a mouthful of rice. Just let me finish this pot first. Finish the pot! Kamo exclaimed, throwing his hands up in the air. The ceremony is starting, and you're here eating? This is your wedding. But Mwendwa, being Mwendwa, shrugged. What's the rush? The food won't wait, but the ceremony can. The villagers burst out laughing. Some slapped their knees, others leaned on each other for support, unable to believe what they were seeing. Even Wanjiru, waiting patiently at the altar, couldn't help but smile when she heard what was happening. After much coaxing and pleading, Mwendwa finally left the pot, but not without grabbing a handful of rice for the road. He waddled over to the wedding ceremony, wiping his greasy hands on his traditional wedding attire, much to the dismay of the tailor who had worked so hard on it. But that was Mwendwa, and no one in the village would have him any other way. The wedding ceremony went on, though much delayed, with the villagers still chuckling under their breath. Mwendwa managed to say his vows, although not without glancing longingly at the feast awaiting him afterward. As soon as the couple was declared husband and wife, Mwendwa didn't wait for the traditional dances or even the blessings from the elders. He bolted straight to the food table, grabbing his newlywed wife's hand along the way. Come, Wanjiru, let's enjoy this feast together, he said, smiling broadly, as if that were the true highlight of the day. The wedding feast became a spectacle in itself. Mwendwa ate like a man possessed, stacking his plate higher and higher with each passing minute. Even Mutina the dog, who had positioned herself strategically under the table, couldn't keep up. The two of them, man and dog, ate until the stars twinkled above the village. It was a sight to behold, one that the villagers would talk about for generations. As the night drew to a close and the guests prepared to leave, Mzee Kabiru approached the happy couple. He pointed at Mwendwa, still munching on some leftover chicken, and at Mutina, now fast asleep after a day of overeating. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, Mzee Kabiru declared with a chuckle. These two are possessed. If they ever stop eating, the world might just end. Everyone laughed, including Mwendwa, who paused briefly from his feast to grin at the crowd. He and Mutina had truly become legends, the bottomless man and the insatiable dog, united by their endless love of food. And so, life continued in Kidundu village, with Mwendwa eating his way through every event, feast, and celebration. He never gained an ounce, never missed a meal, and most importantly, never failed to bring joy and laughter to those around him. As for Wanjiru, well, she learned quickly that the way to her husband's heart was through his stomach, and that was perfectly fine with her. Together they lived happily ever after, with Mwendwa's appetite never wavering, and the villagers always ready to make a little extra for Kidundu's hungriest man.